Well, good evening. I'd like to thank everyone for being here again tonight. And what we're going to talk about tonight is true science is the Christian's friend. And probably we'll end up just giving a kind of a summary, just hitting some key points. Might get into a little bit of depth. But what's really interesting is when I say true science is the Christian's friend, it's literally the more detail we get into, the more obvious it is that the Bible is God's inerrant word. In other words, the more obvious it is that true science really does support God, does support the Bible. And that's kind of the opposite of what a lot of times people try to tell us, but that's kind of going to be the theme tonight. Before I get too far into that, I really do want to compliment Jason on another great lesson, and also those very applicable here, because this is an area where it can be so tempting just to win the fight. In other words, someone will throw something out that's just anti-biblical, and it's so tempting to just respond, and not really think about, hey, we're going to try to save, we're really trying to glorify God and save a person's soul, try to encourage them to obey the gospel. So I can't remember exactly what I said, so I'm not sure how bad it was, but this happened to me many years ago, and someone sent out an email about how these creationists, it's a NASA email, sent to about 50 people, and sent out a page about just how backwards these creationists were, how anybody could believe in, Well, I basically did a reply all, and then hit about 4 pages of stuff that might not have been too friendly. All technically accurate, okay, but I might not. So again, it's so I'm as guilty as anybody of doing that. And in hindsight, I'm like, fortunately, I think I deleted the email, so I'm not sure what I said. So I'll just pretend it was all good. But I don't know if the motives were really perfect at that time. So it was, but again, true science is the Christian's friend. So I want to start out, again, just is evolution a science? A lot of times it really is presented as evolution versus science. And I just say, the idea, and again, not making this a personal attack, it's important, but the idea of evolution, this whole idea that the universe and everything in it simply made itself, really goes against everything we know about true science. So it's not just that it's not scientific, it goes against everything we know. And that's really, all they're saying is, if someone doesn't want to believe that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, well, that's really their only option. If God didn't create the universe and everything in it, then it just had to create itself. And it literally does go against everything we know about science. And so it really is a very harmful, and that's both spiritually and physically, but it's a very harmful, false religion. And so again, true science is the Christian's friend, the enemy of the evolutionists. So just overview tonight, I thought we'd go ahead and just do a very quick review of last night. Last night we talked about just the fact that we can make choices proves that we're more than physical. And so in a way that alone disproves evolution, because evolution is this idea that we're all just chemicals, the whole universe is just physical and chemical, and that just, somehow it made itself. But if we were just a chemical reaction, again, like we went through last night, if we were just several thousand trillion atoms chemically reacting, we could not make even the simplest choice. I could not have just chosen to do that with my little clicker. Because everything we did would just be dominated, would get down to a certain level, just by the chemical reactions that were going on. And so that'd be the temperature in this room, the composition of the air in this room, the particular atoms that are in my body. At a fundamental level, if we were nothing more than physical, then everything we did, all our actions, would just be just simple chemistry. I mean, complicated chemistry, but it all comes down to chemistry. So the fact that we can make even the simplest choice proves we have a spirit. And so I think that's an important one, because the reason I like to start out with that is pretty much everybody's going to agree that they can make decisions. I mean, and this is literally like which shoe to put on first, which cookie to take. When I have to choose on things like that, I just take all of them. So I mean, but anyway, it's still a choice. And so just to make even the simplest choice, so we have to have a spirit. We cannot be just chemicals. So so the reason I think that's important to establish is now we can just go through point by point. And so, for example, when we're talking about life from non-life, okay, we've established that there's a God, because for me to, again, be able to make a choice, I have to have a spirit. Only God can give us a spirit. So if I look at life, well, which one makes the most sense? Would it be that God made life, or that would it be that life just made itself? And so you go to a standard biology textbook or go in a museum or read online. They'll say, well, 3.8 billion years ago, life, they'll say like spontaneously arose on Earth, or life appeared on Earth. But you start looking at the simplest life, and there, again, hundreds of billions of dollars spent on biotechnology, smartest PhDs, incredibly sophisticated laboratories. No one's come close to making life a non-living material. It makes headlines when we can do, like small manipulations to DNA, where we're manipulating life. And it also gets very controversial. Genetically modified organisms, things like that, that we're just barely getting to the point we can do it. I'm not talking about whether that's good or bad. I'm just saying that's how limited our knowledge of life is right now. So we're finally getting to the point where we can just do simple things, very complicated, but simple things like that. So if I realize there's a God, do I want to believe that something that's more complicated than people have ever been able to make, and that's, again, almost unlimited financial resources, smart people, smart life, do I want to believe that just made itself? It doesn't make any sense at all. It'd be like saying a car or an airplane or a space shuttle could make itself, except we can make cars and airplanes and space shuttles. So it's more absurd to claim that life could just make itself. And so that's why, the 3.8 billion years, we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. You look at the dating methods, and they're all very consistent with the Earth being less than 10,000 years old. The only dating method that's not consistent with that is radiometric dating with certain assumptions made. So I know a lot of you were at the Creation Museum, and I don't know if you got to read that one panel, but with certain assumptions, I can say that leads me to these billions of years. But if I look at the amount of salt in the oceans, the amount of sediment on the seafloor, the rate that the energy of the Earth's magnetic field is decaying, if I, just soft tissue dinosaur bones, all those totally consistent with the Earth being less than 10,000 years old. So that's that one, the one that makes it really old. But say supposedly the Earth really was that old. Well, it wouldn't matter. We can run the numbers, we won't have a chance on it. It doesn't matter if the Earth's 1,000 years old, 1 billion years old, 1 trillion years old, 1 quadrillion years old. You don't have enough time for life to make itself just randomly from non-living material. Now, the other way I like to look at that is, you go in the museum, it says 3.8 billion years ago. So I know there's at least one Star Wars fan in the audience. Anybody Star Wars fan want to raise their hand? No? Okay, Jason. Okay, so if you get to know Jason, he's got some great stuff on it. But anyway, those movies, they start out, they say a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Okay, so what I really, really like about that starting is a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, hey, anything can happen, right? So I don't have to worry about how the Millennium Falcon does all that stuff. It's a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. I don't have to think about it. Well, the same thing, unfortunately, is kind of applied when they start saying, 3.8 billion years ago this happened, or 4.54 billion years ago this happened, or 13.8 billion years ago that happened. They try to make us think, a long time ago, I don't really have to think about this, but you can think about it. And so just that point, this whole idea of life making itself, again, goes against everything we know about science. Now, the next one we'll talk about tonight, if I get through the overview slide, the next one we'll talk about tonight is this information in the genome. Okay, now that's a fancy way of saying a bacteria, like we just said, is extremely complicated. Okay, but one way to think about that is the way God codes for the physical characteristics of all life is in our DNA, or people can call it in the genome. And so the DNA of a bacteria is very complicated. We've never come close to being able to duplicate it. But the DNA in a human, or a chicken, or it's even more complicated. And so the idea of evolution is, somehow this bacteria just makes itself, which doesn't work. That's impossible. But then that bacteria has to turn itself into all the other life that we see around us. Okay? So for that bacteria, even if it's supposedly made itself, to then turn itself into all the other life around us, has to add a huge amount of genetic information, one way to think about it. Again, just think about the genetic information. It's just so much to make the bacteria. You need a whole lot more to make a chicken. You need a whole much more to make it. So where does that come from? Where does that information come from? Well, used to be, and still, unfortunately, a lot of the biology textbooks, they'll say, you'll have mutations, mutations to the DNA, and then you'll have natural selection on those mutations, and eventually those mutations will accumulate, you'll create, one kind of animal turn. we have never seen that. In fact, we see the exact opposite, and we'll give an analogy on that. But we see the exact opposite. If you have mutations in natural selection, you're losing information. You're not gaining, and that's true science. I mean, that's science in the lab. It's actually a concern. People are now talking about the fitness of humans, and these are secular papers. Fitness of humans, they're saying, drops 1 to 5% per generation. And that's, you start thinking, wait, that'll get your attention if you're not focused on the spiritual. If we're focused on the spiritual, like we should be as Christians, doesn't matter. We're just worried about a person's spirit. But for a secular scientist, if they start saying, wow, we're losing 1 to 5% fitness they can come to some really scary solutions. And I'm sure we might have a chance to talk about those tonight, some also. But anyway, so that's, so information in the genome's gone the wrong way. Vestigial organs and structures. This is kind of the classic one. When you talk about, I'll move this a little because I know I'm going to whack it. Okay, so a lot of times something's accepted as fact scientifically, and then 50 years later, people are like, well, I can't believe we ever even believed that. That's so silly. So the vestigial organs and structures, that was kind of the same thing. It's 1895, and this idea was put forth that there were 186 organs and structures in our body that had absolutely no function. Okay, so no function whatsoever. And they called them vestigial organs and structures, and then they had these whole just diatribes on how this is proof of evolution. Because these organs and structures, they were just left over from our evolutionary past when we used to be pigs or whatever. We needed these, now we don't need them now. And so these were these evolutionary leftovers. And so that was in 1895, a German scientist, Wiedersheim, really pushed that really hard, and it was used in like the Scopes trial in 1925 as proof of evolution. All the way till 2003. So it took 108 years before they found functions and important functions for every single one of those organ structures that was called vestigial. The last holdout was the appendix. They used to, and you still run that around and say, well, the appendix is just useless. Well, no, the appendix, especially when we're young, is very important to the development of our immune system. Now, when you get to be my age, I can, if I lose my appendix, it's still not good for me, but my immune system, my digestive system is pretty well developed. And so that's the last hold. So it took 108 years for that to happen. So that's when I said that evolution is a false religion that does both physical and spiritual damage. That to me is a classic example, because suppose it's year 1900 and you have this brilliant young anatomist comes out of college, okay? And he's deciding, what am I going to study during my career? Is he going to study the appendix? I mean, why would he do that? That's a useless evolutionary leftover. So it's or is he going to study any of those other vestigial organ structures? Well, no, because again, those are just useless evolutionary. So that's probably, to me, why it took 108 years. Because why would anybody have studied any of those organs or structures? And so that actually set back science. There was a push to call stuff junk DNA. And that was so bad, it only lasted maybe 5 years. But if you remember back about 15 years, if anybody was following it, they'd have this, what they would call junk DNA. And but if you read up on it, what it was, we had decided that only 2% of our DNA actually coded for proteins. And so somehow, this is one of the last 5 years, they said, so the rest of it must be junk, okay? So you ever try to put together a transmission? Okay, I mean, for your sake, I hope you did. Okay, it's really bad. But if you did, you get a manual, it'd be about this thick, and the first couple pages would be the whole parts list. Okay, and then the rest of the manual would be how do those parts go together. And so what the evolutionists were basically saying when they made these junk DNA arguments was, well, the only part of that manual that's important, that's the parts list. Because that was the DNA that coded for proteins, and all that stuff about how it goes together, just junk. Okay, and that's literally what was going on. But you had, famous, atheists, famous evolutionists. Dawkins used to call them pseudogenes. He didn't call them that very long because, again, that was proven wrong. But you had all these famous atheists and evolutionists, and you still, unfortunately, people still buy their books that they wrote 10 years ago, and it's still in there. And if someone's not thinking it through or read up on it, they can get led astray by that. So that's the vestigial organs and structures, but also what they call junk DNA. Homologous structures. This is an interesting one. Well, the idea is because there's similarities. Like I can look at like an X-ray of the bone in my arm, or the X-ray of say a dog's leg, and there's some similarities. You know, the bones, same material, same general structure. Joints have some similar structure. Muscles, and so you see these physical characteristics, these physical similarities between animals and people. And so the idea was, well, because we see these physical similarities, that obviously means one kind of animal turned into another. Okay, so that's the argument on homologous structures. And the whole, you have like departments of zoology that'll say, see, this is proof that God didn't create things because we see these similarities. Well, a couple things. One, the Bible mentions the only difference what's important is the spiritual difference. Only people are created in God's image. Animals aren't. And so it's the spiritual difference that's important. But also, when we see physical similarities, what's that usually evidence of?
Design.
Yeah, it's design, and it's the same. It's a lot of times the same designer, right? I mean, if you and this can be on anything. I mean, I know people, I can't, but they'll be driving down the road and they'll say, "Oh, that's a Ford, or that's a Chevy, or that's a Honda, or that's." And from like either they've got like 22 vision, right? They're not reading the nameplate, but they just notice the similarities in the physical characteristics. Have you ever been driving down the road, you turn on the radio, hear a song you've never heard before, but you're really sure you know who wrote the song? Ever happened? I know a lot of people say that because first time they hear a song, they don't have to wait for the announcer to say, "Oh, that's the new song by da-da-da." They just know who wrote it. Well, how do they do that? Well, similarities in voice, the instruments used, maybe the topic, and so again, similarities. When we see similarities, all of our experience is because there's the same creator. If we go, someone that's really good at art, again, definitely not me, but if they go in these art museums, I went in an art museum once, because at the up in DC, and I mean there were like paintings like equivalent of like across the parking lot, and he'd say, "Oh, that's a such and such." Yeah, how do you know? But he was right all the time. Okay, so but again, he would just look at the color scheme, the paintings and things, and say, "Okay, that's," and from those similarities, he would know. So all of our experiences, when we see commonalities, is because there's the same designer. So we would expect to see physical similarities in life, given that God created all life. And so the homologous structures, to me, it's not I can't say that's a technical argument, but it certainly is a religious one. But if I just rely on my own experience, I would say, hey, when I see these commonalities, that's not me thinking, rabbits turned into dogs, turned into humans. That's me thinking that the same God gave the physical bodies, to all life. But that's not what's important anyway. The importance is the spiritual difference, because only people are created in God's image. Age of the Earth, we talked about a few of them. Just if you really start looking at how can you date the Earth, it's pretty. You can come up with dozens of ways to come up with an age, and literally all of them are consistent with the Earth being less than 10,000 years old. Now, won't have time to talk much about radiometric dating. On radiometric dating, there's three main assumptions that have to be made, but the one that looks like it's wrong is this assumption that radioactive decay rates have always been the same, and that's because it's like 2006. I think Stanford and Purdue both started, two secular, famous secular universities started saying that they were measuring fluctuations in the decay rates of their medical isotopes. Okay, and so you're like, and they're pretty small, but they were actually measuring fluctuations, and that just bothered everybody, because the assumption that those decay rates are always constant, and so they still don't know exactly why they fluctuate. Their claim is that it has to do with the distance from the sun. So in the winter, the Earth's actually further from the sun. In the winter, the Earth from the northern hemisphere is closer to the sun. In the summer, we're further from the sun, and so that's why there's a little difference between the. But anyway, they said they think it's a fluctuation. They don't know what's causing it. They can measure it. They know it's happening. There were some reports out about a month ago, and it was related to beryllium-8 and helium-4, and some anomalies in the radioactive decay. And they're saying there has to be like a fifth force. And this is published in Science and Physics today. So it sounds really subtle, but the whole point is. things are pretty physically stable right now. You know, I mean, it's not, compare that to like the flood, or compare that to creation week. You know, when I talk about the universe being physically stable now, things are physically stable now, but we're still seeing fluctuations in decay rates. So, in radioactive decay. So what could have been happening during the flood or during creation week? Well, to me, it's not unreasonable, and this is one of the ones can't go back to the flood, can't go back to creation week. But to me, it's not at all unreasonable to think, well, if I'm seeing fluctuations now when things are pretty stable, those fluctuations could have been much larger during creation week or the flood. In fact, I'd be much more surprised if they were just exactly the same with everything that was going on. Well, once that happens, then the whole argument that radiometric dating says the Earth has to be very old just goes away. Now, a few other ways to look at that, real quick, and well, I really might not get through my overview slide, but but just a couple ways to think about that. One is, anybody ever just remember reading an article about how old diamonds are postulated to be? Okay, so sometimes, and I think it's more just a marketing ploy, but you have people saying that diamonds formed hundreds of millions of years ago or billions of years ago. Okay, and so, but then the process of diamonds have a really good, really solid crystal structure. You know, that's what makes a diamond sparkle. But there's a radioactive isotope of carbon. It's carbon-14, and half of it goes away every 5,730 years. But we find that carbon-14 inside of diamonds. And you can rule out contamination, you can rule out that carbon-14 is somehow forming in the diamond. So that carbon-14 had to be in the diamond when it formed, but half of it goes away every 5,730 years. So if half goes away every 5,730 years, what's going to happen after like 100,000 years? There won't be anything left. But we measure it, it's there. So that's right there is a big clue there's something wrong with our dating methods. I'll do the analogy in reverse. Anyone ever hear that? It's kind of a riddle. If I said I'll either give you $100 right now, or I'll give you a penny today, 2 pennies tomorrow, 4 pennies the next day, 8 pennies the next day, 16 pennies the next day, and do that for 2 months, which do you take? Yeah, I think there's actually, you should probably take $100 right now because I'll welch on the other one, but you're right. If I was being true, you would take the pennies, yeah. And so it's kind of the same thing. But it's going in reverse. And so so that's another point that we know there's something wrong with the radiometric dating method. Another one is, so helium, you ever have a helium balloon and like you have a birthday party, filled up with helium, and unfortunately at birthday parties, invariably someone lets go of their balloon and it floats up to the ceiling, right? Okay, so what happens after a few days? Is the balloon still up on the ceiling? No, it sinks down, it's on the ground, okay? And so the reason is that the helium is actually diffusing out through the membrane on the balloon. I used to think when I was little that it was leaking out the end, and you can tell me afterwards if you did this too. So you tie like 27 knots in the end of the balloon, and it still leak out. Okay, so it actually is diffusing through the side of the balloon, and so when certain kinds of radioactive decay, like uranium decaying to lead, when uranium-238 decays to lead-206, you actually release a helium nuclei. Okay, so you just think of that's an alpha decay. So you're creating helium, and that happens in rocks. Zircons are one kind of crystal that they talk about. But what you can do, so now I know I've got so much uranium turned into lead, which is one way they might date that zircon. But another way you can look at it, you say, well, how much helium is left in that zircon, right? It'd be kind of like if you came in this room and there's a balloon up on the ceiling, would you think that, wow, that balloon's probably been there since the building was made? It's like, no. Now you'd say, wow, someone's had a birthday party, in the last. So it's kind of the same thing. If I look at one of these zircons and I say, well, there's a lot of helium left in there, I know that helium had to be formed recently. It couldn't have formed over 1 billion years. It had to literally have happened within the last, because I can go in the lab, I can measure how fast the helium leaks out of that zircon. I can go in a lab, measure how fast helium leaks out of a balloon. It's the same thing. So that's just another data point. When we find these zircons, yeah, it looks like a lot of uranium turned into lead, but there's so much helium left in there, we know it had to happen recently. When I look at a diamond, and I say, wow, there's carbon-14 in there. I know it had to be formed recently. And then when I look at, go to the lab, and I say, wow, people are seeing the radioactive decay rates fluctuating. Again, they say, okay, so that's another clue. But I just say all that to say that's probably the one that someone might try to, I guess say hit on the most as far as just, well, the Bible, Bible's clear that the Earth's a few thousand years old. We know from science. Well, no. I mean, if I just go through all of the ways you can estimate the age of the Earth, all consistent with the Earth being less than 10,000 years old, including radiometric dating, if I don't make arbitrary assumptions, basically, against that, I guess I'd say, against the Bible. Big Bang Theory. This one, so in a nutshell, right now we have to make up 96% of the universe for there not to be a fatal contradiction between what the Big Bang predicts and what we observe. And what I mean by that is, right now it's 4% of the universe is, according to Big Bang Theory, things that we can actually observe. 23% of the universe is what they call dark matter. 73% is what they call dark energy. Is anybody, I don't know who all science fiction, this is science fiction, but they call it science fact. But anyway, ever hear about dark energy, dark matter, things like that? Okay, so think about that. So 4% I can observe, 23% dark matter, 73% dark energy. Otherwise, there's this fatal contradiction between the Big Bang and what it would predict and what we observe. And so whenever something new is found, well, you just can put some dark matter there. Or dark matter, basically, I give it any property I want. I can put it anywhere I want to, but it's kind of like matter. I just can't observe it. Dark energy, same thing. I could put it anywhere I wanted to, give it any property I wanted to observe. It's so that's what it takes to make that theory work. And so making it 96%. So what you want to think about is, we're about 20 minutes in, so it's always good to have a little math. People start to get sleepy, you give them a math problem. So the idea is, okay, if I'm allowed to do that, say X is what I can observe, okay, and then Y is what I'll call fudge factors. That's like dark matter, dark energy, everything else. And then say, I'll just give a number that I want to be the answer. So say I want the answer to be 100, okay? So X is just what I can actually observe. Y are these fudge factors, and then I want the answer to be 100. So say I make an observation and I say X is 10. Well, Y is going to be 90, okay? So that's fine, right? Because X plus Y is 100. If I make observations, X is 20. Well, that's easy, Y is 80. The answer is still 100. If I make observations, well, now X is really 30, no problem. Y is 70. The answer is 100. Say 5 years from now, I say, I really wish the answer had been 200. No problem, right? Because my observations, say my observations were 30, then I just make Y 170. And so what the point is, it doesn't matter what my observations are. If I'm allowed to make up 96% of the universe, I can pretend any set of observations matches any theory I want. Okay, now is that clear? Or does that sort of make sense? Yeah, see, everybody's nodding yes. Math always comes through. So it's but that's so it's not even a scientific theory. I mean, it's literally the way it's structured. It doesn't, and there's many other factors. They talk about things like you'll hear fancy terms like cosmic background radiation, and well, the problem with the cosmic background radiation is actually too uniform. And so they'll say, oh, this proves it. No, it doesn't. It's so uniform that somehow light had to be able to travel back and forth across the universe many times. And by their own theory, it didn't have time. Well, no, they make up a fudge factor. They call it inflation. They have all these things that they throw into to try to solve it. It's just a fudge factor. So it literally, the way it's structured, it doesn't matter what someone went out and observed tonight. You could just add in another one of these factors and pretend it supported the theory. So that one's going away for many reasons. Now, okay, so now I'll give you some really weird ones. Okay, so with the Big Bang, think of what it's saying. It's saying that a universe just popped into existence. Okay, I mean literally that's what the Big Bang says. Our universe just popped into existence. And there. Well, our universe is so finely tuned, according to the Big Bang, just for life to exist and for it to form. Of course, we know it's because God created it that way. So it's very straightforward from a biblical standpoint. But they'll say, wow, it's so finely tuned that all this just happened. Well, then they conclude that it's so finely tuned that the odds of a universe just popping into existence that is that finely tuned, that's like zero compared to the odds of a brain popping into existence. Okay, so anybody see where science fiction fans see where I'm going here? Okay, so their own theory, they actually say the odds of a universe that's as finely tuned as ours popping into existence is much, 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 much less than a brain popping into existence. So, guess what that means? That means I'm not here, nobody around you's here. You are a brain that has popped out of the chaos, okay? And you think you have memories, you think you're in a church building, you think, and then in a fraction of a second you're gonna disintegrate back into chaos. Okay, so first read that, I was like, nah. Well, go online. It's Wikipedia. They call it the Boltzmann brain problem. Apparently, there's actually been taxpayer money spent trying to solve the Boltzmann brain problem. But that's really what it comes down to. They have to believe the universe just randomly made itself. But they now figured out that, well, it's actually much more likely for just, because they don't believe we have a spirit. So just the physical atoms in your brain, which is all they think your brain is, it's much more likely those just to pop into existence. Okay, so that's a really strange one. And then probably I won't call it the worst one, but another one to think about is it still needs a supernatural beginning. So if you go again out on the internet, they'll talk about universe generators and multiverses. Did anybody? I should have mentioned. Did anybody see Guardians of the? You like Guardians of the Galaxy also? Yeah. Okay. So good man back there. But I think ego is a Boltzmann brain, right? If you watch it carefully. So anyway, so that. But remember they talked about the universe generator and how there were like 6 universes. Well, anyway, so it's not recommending any of these movies. But it's but anyway, so they have this idea that there's this universe generator out there that just makes universes. And after it's made an infinite number of universes, then there is a probability of one that will have a universe like that. I mean, it gets really strange. It's all just playing with the math. But that universe generator, well, it's just a false god. It's no different than any other false god, but it just sounds very technical. If someone says there's a universe generator, because it's outside of nature, it's in the supernatural. They used to talk about the Big Bang was just everything exploded from a point of infinite density, and a lot of times they would go ahead and admit where the laws of nature don't apply. Well, if you're in a place where the laws of nature don't apply, it's supernatural. So everything, no matter how technical they try to make it sound, even in their own theory, has to appeal to the supernatural. Okay, so that's on the Big Bang, and then the fossil record geology, again, very consistent with the Bible. And I think, again, a lot of you that were at the Creation Museum, they have some really good exhibits. Everything we see about the fossil record, the geology of the flood, how that's very consistent with the Bible. So, let's see. I think the final slide for tonight. So it's, of course it is. So the whole idea on want to do this information in the genome, because I think that's the one people will generally understand free will. Again, if we have free will, we have to have a spirit. I think people, if they think about it, and you can, because you can just hours and hours and hours about how complicated life is and how even the simplest life couldn't make itself. But most people just think about it. If we can't do it, given hundreds of billions of dollars, smartest PhDs, best labs, it really is not credible to say it just made itself. I mean, literally, if life could make itself, when we send our kids to kindergarten, the first day they should come home with the life they made. I mean, you think about it, if it was so simple that it could just make itself, that would be, and so those are pretty easy for people to understand. But I like the one on what really happens when you have mutations in natural selection, because I think that's one that it's a little harder for, once people think about it, they realize what's going on, but it's just something that people need to think about. So, like say we get a new breed of dog or cat. Let's see if I got those here. No, okay, so basically, say you have a new breed of a dog or cat. This was, again, I think up at the Creation Museum. Well, what happens is you take like the wolf kind, or basically the dog kind, and the original, the pair of dogs that came off Noah's Ark, they think they look a lot like a wolf, basically. And then all of the hundreds of breeds of dogs we have today were bred using genetic information that was in that dog kind. And that's what, we know that from true science, from the genome. So you're losing information. Again, this whole idea is loss of information is the opposite of evolution. You're not turning a bacteria into a human or something. So that's a good example to maybe mention. But at a more fundamental level, what we can do is just think about, well, what are we really talking about when you have mutations in natural selection? And so just to take it away from just to apply it in another area, one thing you can do is just have a person think about the perfect car. Okay, so people like thinking about automobiles. So have a person think about the perfect car and then writing a manual for that car. Okay, so now that's the equivalent of, you can say, the genome for the car. In other words, that's the manual for making the car. So you want to make the perfect car, and so that's, again, analogous to DNA. It's just the manual for making the car. And then suggest they make 1,000 manuals, but before they make any cars at all, make 100 changes to each manual. And they have to be just random. So in other words, change 100 words in each manual. Well, that's your mutations. Okay, so you started out with a perfect manual, similar to a perfect genome, and then you mutated it. Okay, so you made 100 changes, but they're random, so each of those 1,000 manuals had a different 100 words changed. They don't have the same words changed. Now go ahead and make 1,500 cars. You had 1,000 manuals, make 1,500 cars. The reason you made extra cars is you need to be able to apply natural selection. Okay, so you've got the 1,500 cars you made. Well, what are the cars going to look like? Are they going to be perfect? Yeah, they won't be perfect because you changed 100 words, but are they all going to have the same, I guess, in other words, some of them, maybe the words you changed, maybe it doesn't have a rear mirror anymore, right? Yeah, sometimes, depending how bad the traffic is, we don't really need that anyway. So, so it's like, okay, so I can live without the rear mirror, but say another one, it's got the engines up on the roof. Okay, so I can't really live with the engine on the roof. That's not doing me any good. So I get rid of the 500 cars that I just can't deal with. Well, that's natural selection. So you see what you have going here. It's a very tight analogy for mutations and natural selection. So now I do it again. Now every manual has had 200 words changed, right? And so I do the same thing. In order to take the manuals that were used to make the 1,000 cars I kept, I randomly change another 100 words in each of those manuals. I go ahead and make 1,500 cars. I get rid of the 500 I don't like. I keep the 1,000 I like the most. After I've done that 100 times, every manual has now had 10,000 words changed in it, right? And so you keep doing it. So the question is, for the evolutionist, is how long does it take my car to turn into a jet airplane? Okay, that's not the direction you're going, right? And that's not the direction we see in the lab. And it's really ironic, if someone's a chemistry major these days, if you try to work with a mutagen, and that's hard. I'm a nuclear engineer. You try to work with radiation sources, it's hard because we know mutations are bad for you. You can do it, but it's every other field we know mutations are bad, except evolution, where supposedly mutations are good because you couple them with natural selection, probably makes things better. Well, we know it's not true, but that's just kind of where we're at. So anyway. Go to my final slide, which was actually the final slide from last night. All of this, just really appreciate your attention. I know that was a very quick summary tonight, but it all just goes back to, we need to be prepared to give a defense for the faith that is in us. And if you're talking to somebody on a topic, I love talking about this, I don't know if you've noticed, but so say you're on a topic that you don't really like talking about, well that's, we need to prepare ourselves. We need to say, okay, what's this person interested in? What's what's their real reason for not being willing to objectively consider the Bible? Why aren't they obeying the gospel? A lot of times they won't tell us. They just won't come right out and say, okay, this is what I'm really struggling with. So it's something that's why we have to get to know people. That's why the personal relationships are so important. And so with all of this, that was just I always say just a sampling, because if someone was hung up on one of those, and you never know what someone's going to be hung up on, well, just realize there's some really good answers out there. but it might take a little more, just a little more digging. And again, just depending on what the person is really hung up on, and so or what's keeping them from objectively considering the Bible, I guess is the way I should phrase it. But again, the goal is to, I guess it's almost in the practical sense is the first one is to develop enough of a rapport and enough credibility with the person they're willing to sit down and study the Bible with you. And so once they're willing to sit down and study the Bible, let's keep it very friendly, very open, everything Jason was saying, but then just keep leading them towards the truth. Eventually, we'll have the opportunity to tell them that you spend a lifetime studying our Bibles, and we should spend a lifetime studying our Bibles. But if they're in a situation where they haven't obeyed the gospel yet, then that's really important. One of the first things we study. And so at the very least, we should then be able to go through and point out the Bible is very clear about the plan of salvation. The Bible is very clear about what a person needs to do to be saved, to be able to spend eternity with God, because a lot of times that's even a stumbling block. Again, if Julie and I both grew up outside the church, and we were kind of, I guess, started moving in the right direction once we were married, but it's really confusing out there, as far as and literally when we visited the Madison church, that was the first time we've been to a Church of Christ, and this was after many, many years, but it was also the first time anybody had ever, when we would ask them questions like, well, what do you guys think about this? We would go, they have some big explanation of all they believe. The church was the first place that ever said, and this is one of the elders there, he told us, doesn't matter what we think, it's what the Bible says. And I think, for Christians, a lot of times say, oh, of course everybody says that. No, the church was the only time first time anybody had ever said that to us. And so I guess the whole point is just of this slide is just be prepared, and again, talk to myself as much as hopefully that person will ask that question, and then but just really drive home. It doesn't matter what I think; it's what the Bible says. Here's what the Bible says. And so what I just have on the screen there is just some examples of all the examples in the book of Acts of people being saved, people obeying the gospel. Of course, there's all kinds of scripture that backs that up. But just have that in mind if you get to that point, studying with a person, why they should listen to you. Why they should listen to what I'm saying versus who knows who else has been telling them. And the point is, they're not listening to what I'm saying. I'm just showing them, helping them see what the Bible says. And so that's it's not how to phrase it, don't even go back to Jason. It's not a personal credibility fight. Oh, because I've got a suit on, he didn't. It's not that. It's literally I'm just showing you what the Bible says. And if they've heard something else, to get it, just to be blunt, they'll heard some really strange things, but it's not in the Bible, so they're not going to be able to show you where it is in the Bible because it's not in there. But you have to be very gentle and very understanding when talking with them about that. So I say all that. I say doing meetings like this, I'm not sure who's. I don't know a lot of you. I'm getting to know a lot of you, and I really appreciate your hospitality. But if anybody has any needs at all, any questions on the Bible, any questions about the plan of salvation, just don't leave tonight till you just talk about it, brainstorm with some people, go through the Bible about it. And so we will be doing the song of encouragement, but just think of that as encouragement to be encouraged to just always be just able to defend our faith in all areas, and be encouraged to talk to other Christians, talk to the congregation here, talk to some of us that are up here from Alabama. But if anything at all that anybody in this room can encourage you with or help you with, I guess just either come forward as we sing the song of encouragement, or just talk to us out over cookies. Okay, so that's a really weird invitation. But that's what it is.